All right. Good morning, everybody. Goeiemôre almal. Sani Bonani, Molweni, Dumela. It's good to see everybody here. And welcome today to this special event on our calendar as UWC. It is the culmination today and tomorrow of a long process, a search process for the DVC RNI, Research and Innovation, as also the registrar position. That'll be tomorrow. And I will be chairing the sessions with respect to the presentations to be made. So I want to welcome you all to the meeting this morning. We also are graced by the presence of our Chair of Council, Ms. Mpungoshe, as well as members of Council in their capacities as members of the SACC this morning. We have students among us, as well as members of staff among us, representatives from stakeholder bodies at the institution, IF, and so on. Everybody is very, very welcome to the meeting. The presentations will be 30 minutes in length. There will be a 10-minute Q&A session. SACC members who are in the audience will have the opportunity to ask their questions during the interview session. So other members of the audience, all other members of the audience are welcome to pose questions during the Q&A session. If there are additional questions and we've run out of time, there's also an opportunity to email questions through to the registrar directly. Dr. Nita is in our audience. So if you have any questions that you felt you would like to have had a chance to address, there wasn't enough time, please email within the hour following the interview the question that you would have liked to have posed, so that we can also keep track of what questions are applicable to which interviewee. I will also take signals from our secretariat as regards the timekeeping. Good morning and welcome. And we aim to remain on schedule in terms of time this morning. I think everybody is aware of where the facilities are. The bathrooms, if you want to exit, are outside that door and up the passage, and then turn left, and the male and female bathrooms are there on your right-hand side if you need to use the facilities. We're going to take about 4 questions for the Q&A. And that's probably what the time will allow. So I'm also going to ask that different members have a chance to pose their questions. So it'll be ideal if we could have a question coming from a different person each time, rather than only one person with lots of questions. Um, that would be ideal. And then please also note that the topics have been shared with the candidates in advance, and the presentations will speak to the topics, and we would very much like that the questions also be focused on the presentation itself. Um, on that note, I think I've covered all of the preliminary remarks, and I would like then for us to welcome our first candidate, Prof. Alan Christoffels, who will be joining us, and I will introduce Prof. Alan to you. Um, yes, good morning, Prof. Christoffels, and a very warm welcome to you this morning. Um, it's really a delight to be able to welcome you to this interview session. We look forward to listening to you, and I will introduce you formally to the audience, although you're well known among us. Prof. Christoffels is a highly respected figure in the scientific community. He's been with UWC, as I think you would have gathered also from reading his CV, for a good many years, currently serving as the director for the South African National Bioinformatics Institute, what we commonly refer to as SANBI at UWC. What makes Prof. Christoffels' journey so remarkable is how he has positioned UWC at the very center of global health security, whether it was leading the assembly of South Africa's first SARS-CoV-2 genome during the pandemic, or spearheading the Public Health Alliance for Genomic Epidemiology. It's a word I always stumble on, and I got it right, Prof. Allen, this morning, which is a consortium that now spans some 63 countries. Prof. Christoffels has proven that he can lead not only massive international projects, but also, in addition to that leadership, is a top-tier researcher himself. With over 130 publications, he is an institution builder who has also secured well over 300 million rand in funding and mentored dozens of PhD and master's students who are now leaders in their own right. Prof. Christoffels brings a vision of research that is high-tech, high-impact, and deeply sustainable, and that is testified to in his long career. We welcome Prof. Allen among us this morning and really look forward to listening to you. Thank you. Thank you.
We're definitely going to swap notes on genomic epidemiology, and you showing me what epistemological means. I cannot get that word across my tongue often. But colleagues, thank you very much for this opportunity. And what I'm hoping today is to frame this presentation as a research and innovation strategy that would drive the institutional operation plan and in some way also contribute to the ambitions of our UWC 2040 statement. And so the brief I got were essentially twofold. The one is, how does UWC define for itself what it means to be a leading research university? And then secondly, how do we move towards that position? And what I'm wanting to attempt this morning in this 30 minutes is to address both of them. And the way I'm wanting to do that is first as a process of the institutional definition. And so we already know that UWC is a research-led university. It's got very strong academic foundation and a very determined social justice obligation and mindset. We have a public purpose as well. So the question is not so much do we become research intensive, but how do we define that next step in a way that is really true to our identity, harnessing our intellectual strengths, and also our societal role. My role as a DVC would be then to lead a structured and inclusive process whereby which we refine that definition across the university, and post that process is to then align it to our IOP. I think secondly, what I wanted to do this morning is to outline a strategic pathway. The argument that I'm going to make this morning repeatedly is that we are strengthening research intensity not only by our research outputs. I think that's important because it's also about improving the alignment between people, systems, funding, and our intellectual purpose. And so the slides that I'm going to click through this morning is not intended to be a fixed approach. It is one way through which we could potentially see the university seeing its role as a leading research university. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to start with a conceptual framework. And after that conceptual framework, I'm going to pivot towards a strategic pathway. All right, let's go. So what does it mean to be a leading research university? And I put to you that it is beyond just volume and capacity. And what it really is how do we effectively align people, systems, finances, and our intellectual pursuits at this university? And this alignment is not happening in isolation, right? Because what it is doing, it is going to speak to the institutional priorities. And for us at UWC, those institutional priorities are articulated through the IOP, and I'm sure you've read that IOP from cover to cover multiple times. Nevertheless, I want to put to you that there are 4 goal areas, which you already know. And so rather than seeing this research and innovation portfolio as a separate domain, what you'll see here, I've decided to position it as a cross-cutting driver for all the goal areas within the IOP. And so that has really been around institutional framing, right? But I think what I want to move to now is really a strategic pathway. And the way I have conceptually thought of this is that I see it as having 4 pillars, each of which is going to advance a particular dimension of the IOP. And so I want to take pillar 1, and I don't want you to get fixated on the data because it comes from a 2021 report. But I think what this is really is to give you a sense of what I'm thinking. It is really an illustrative purpose. And if we are thinking about a pillar of strengthening research and innovation, I think we need to really reflect on the data and consider our where we stand, and really an intellectual honesty. And you know, at the moment, there is a United Nations process of selecting a new Secretary General. And the one critique that has come out in the media is, why are leaders not intellectually honest? And that is the basis for driving a strategic plan. And so for me, just looking at some of these positioning of ourselves in the sector, and I think the question that we're really wanting to understand and investigate within the portfolio of the DVC R&I is really to understand what is it that is limiting our ability to shift our capacity into research outputs. And within this portfolio, what I would want to do is really engage to understand what are the barriers to moving this forward. I mean, we are encouraged by data that I've seen, and I thank Jessica for that, about the increase in our research outputs over the last 5 years, albeit for a component of the research community. And so really we're wanting to understand the outputs, not outputs only, but how is the research ecosystem going to support our researchers in order to move this bar forward? If one were to use another lens and look at our capacity within the university, again, this is for illustrative purposes only. This is audited data that came out of the 2021 report. And this is looking at the ratio of academic staff to students. And so you do see that across the sector, we certainly have comparable numbers. I mean, there are a couple of extremes on both the left and the right of the graph. But I think our question now really is, how do we move our capacity to really convert that into research output? And I would see that the position of the DVC-RNI would apply his or her mind to really understand the enabling environment that will allow us to move our research outputs from where they are. So what am I saying as I just conclude this pillar one is that we know our capacity where we are at. We are not going to double our staff numbers in the next 5 years. We know where we are in terms of our research outputs, and so we need to convert the capacity that we currently have to research outputs, and the ways in which we do that are certainly looking at our workloads, our postgraduate density, how do we scale that, our postdoctoral support, and also just looking at institutional systems that would enable us to do this. And so while I'm not listing all the stuff that could be considered, but this gives a bit of a flavor of what I see as being important things to consider if I were to have this position. How do we create the conditions that allow scholars to actually do the work that they're wanting to do? And there are a couple of things around administrative processes. How do we align our processes in order to allow the researchers to actually carry on doing the work that they should be doing? How do we provide the supporting mechanisms in order to achieve that? And are there any incentive mechanisms that we're wanting to implement in order to drive this forward as well? I'm going to move on to slide number 2. And I think slide number 2 really is around developing, supporting, and retaining research talent. And I feel that a leading research university has to invest into the full talent pool from your emerging researchers down at the student level all the way to your leading researchers. And while we have certain strategic priorities within the portfolio, and I've listed a couple there, I probably want to hone in for the purposes of this presentation on 2 parts. I want to speak about the postdocs and also speak about supporting the research leaders. So let's take the postdocs. I don't need to convince this audience of the value of postdoctoral fellows within the research ecosystem. We know their value as an intellectual asset to the system. And looking at the numbers, this is some data that came out of the second paper here in 2024. But interesting enough, while I was preparing for this, there's a paper that came out in University Press by 2 researchers this year, which really was asking the question, what is our national postdoctoral framework and what are the challenges associated with it when they assess a number of universities across the country? And what it is clear is that what we lack is an appropriate framework to recognize the value of our postdoctoral fellows who are undoubtedly, and certainly based on that paper, feeling insecure in terms of what their role is and at times feeling exploited through that. So what does that mean for us? We've got 151 postdocs across all our 7 faculties. And I want to thank the Deputy Registrar for providing me with this data for our university. And so I wish to put to you that we need to move that number at least twice as much. How do we do that? We need enabling systems, I use that phrase again, that will support our academic staff in order to secure the funding that will take us to a doubling of our postdoctoral fellows. And while we strategize on how to strengthen our systems, how to identify the appropriate grant opportunities, how to create a space for interdisciplinary work across our different faculties, I think there are certainly some things that we can do as an immediate in that journey towards strengthening our postdoctoral fellows framework. And I've listed a couple over here. Essentially, they all speak to wanting to elevate the level of our postdoctoral fellows within the university system. The other group within the talent pipeline that I'm wanting to mention is that of research leadership. As a university, we have a duty to support both emerging researchers as well as research leaders, and we don't do this one at the expense of the other. But we need to identify ways to differentiate the support systems that we make available to our staff within the university. For the academic leaders within the university, I think it's recognizing them as an institutional asset. They certainly mentor young academics. They certainly anchor a lot of the large grants that are secured through the university, and they become a vehicle through which we can ensure that emerging researchers are supported and also developed in their career trajectory. Pillar 3 for me is looking at enabling institutional systems and inclusion. And so there's no list of them, and don't be worried, I'm not going to cover all of them. But I think these 6 areas are critical in the DVC R&I's portfolio in shaping how we provide the supportive environment that can catalyze the kind of intellectual engagement and also output that we are claiming, or certainly that I am claiming, is that we need. And so let me just tackle a few of them, just high level. In terms of research funding support, I think as an implementation strategy, what we need to understand is this juxtaposition of research and development, which is under the DVC R&I, and grants management, which is currently under the finance portfolio. And aligning these two are critically important because it's beyond the financial management of the grant, but the grant management processes. And so trying to fully understand that alignment is key for us as we position ourselves over the next 5 years, and to reflect that alignment in our research policy. A few other examples, but to move on, infrastructure. I think as you and I both know, for a long time we've only had an ICS department who fundamentally and historically has a mandate to support student and staff, excluding research support. And this has been the impetus for the establishment of an e-research division within the university who could support the research needs of our staff at the university. And so what is really important for us is these two strategic arms of the university, how do they speak to each other? And I'll just mention one example of why this is becoming so important, and just looking at the more recent research chair that we have obtained as a collaboration between Britain and South Africa, the research chair in digital humanities. And for those that are more technology savvy, there's this notion of a stack of processes. So they talk about a technology stack. And it turns out that you can also still talk about a digital humanities stack. And these are really all the interwoven methods, technical software, all the things that are needed in order to develop the digital products that are required. And so, if as a digital ecosystem design, if it has so many similarities between what supports the natural sciences, as well as the arts and humanities, it's even more critical that in this portfolio of the DVC-RNI, that we fully align both ICS and its e-research plan so that we can deliver on what the IOP at the moment is referring to, a digital ecosystem that will be an enabler for researchers. Interdisciplinary platforms. What does such a creative space look like? I've been through a process recently where I led a interfaculty grant application to the Wellcome Trust in combining humanities and the natural sciences. What did I learn from this chase for £500,000 of money? I learned that you mustn't chase the money in the absence of support systems. And I must say thanks to my collaborators, both in the Department of Historical Studies, in law, I see them here, at the HSRC. But in order to deliver on a grant, which is actually an intersection of disciplines that speak very different languages, chasing after a grant within 2 weeks is actually quite a task. And so I remember phoning up Tammy Schaefer, who then sent me to Coney Benson, a name that I only knew because I then got the cell phone number of her. And when I told that we were wanting to apply for the grant, she asked me, when is it due? I said, well, that is the problem. It's due in 2 weeks' time. And so how do we think through the spaces that are needed for 7 faculties that are so diverse to be able to communicate, to be able to exchange ideas, not to learn that there's a Coney Benson in historical studies when we're about to submit a grant that is 2 weeks away. And so I think that within the Office of the DVC-RNI, one has to think through this implementation strategy of providing and catalyzing the spaces that are needed for researchers to engage. And it won't apply to everybody. I remember starting out my career, you dare not come and speak to me about another faculty. I've got a job to do. I've got the next master's student to graduate. I've got the next PhD to graduate. But I do feel that there are sufficient researchers within our university who are driven by the interest and the need for interdisciplinary work, and we need to make provision for that. So pillar 3, enabling our institutional systems. Do we see the university as a shared intellectual space? And I think what I want to position the RNI portfolio as a space that recognizes that all 7 of our faculties should coexist, not in competition, which sometimes we do, but really as a dialogue, and recognizing that we have a diverse scholarship practice within the university, and that what I defined as valuable to me in the natural sciences, in order to deliver on my mandate, might not be necessarily the same as what is in another faculty. And so for us is the single mode of productivity. How do we as a university, more specifically, as a portfolio that is under the DVC Research and Innovation, create the spaces in order to achieve that? Our IOP, as well as the previous one, continuously refers to us as an anchor institution. Suffice to say, I'll just mention one thing here that I'm not mentioning in my talk, is the strengthening partnerships and innovation, and that's both with government and industry. I suppose thirdly on the slide speak to civil society. And we have examples on campus where this is done very well. Think of SciMac in the applied chemistry field. But within the DVC-RNI portfolio, the technology transfer office is there, and I think continuously refining how best we support a group of researchers who is striving to innovate within or with our commercial partners is something that we have to keep in mind. I'm going to go through the next, and don't worry, I've got about one slide that's split into 4 here. But if you have gone through the IOP, and I'm sure you have, you'll see a graph that looks like this. In fact, it stops there. And I want to thank Tashurika for producing this data when we worked on this section of the IOP together. But what it does tell you is that our risk is that we are dependent on state funding more so than on research funding. And that is our biggest risk. And if you look and you were to benchmark against leading researchers in the country, and you can argue as to what or who those are, what we cannot argue is the research funding that is used by these universities to drive their research agenda. And that is sitting about 1.3 billion rand. So what that means for us is that we have to creatively think of how we build our systems such that we allow researchers to secure the kind of money that would be key to delivering on a mandate that needs to be that of a leading research university as we espouse within our IOP. And so the couple of ways in which we could do that, there's the whole process of how do we support our researchers both before they secure the grant, after they obtain the grant. We're wanting to explore various ways of securing funding. The idea of being dependent on state funding is actually not an option. There's cost recovery, a very sensitive topic, which we're going to have to engage as a university community. I think we have to engage in it because I think we all have a shared agenda, and that is the intellectual pursuit of this university. And we have over years had to put in place our own mechanisms in order to achieve that, but we have to discuss cost recovery. We need to understand our funders' profile. There is a clear distinction between how funders operate. And as the DVC for R&I, I would like to see how our research and development unit is sensitive to that and how we support the research staff, the academic staff in that. And I think, lastly, risk management, and I'm going to just have one slide on that. And I want to alert you to, back in 2016, I applied for a grant. And the one thing that the funder wanted to know is, how does your university stack up, or what is their ability to be able to deliver on the grant? And as a global grant community, there has been a system put in place called a good financial grant practice. And what they've done is developed a tool or a mechanism through which universities could actually benchmark themselves, like an internal barometer of where do we stand in delivering on our grants. And at that time in 2016, we were actually at the level. Many years have gone since then, but as a strategic driver within this portfolio, we actually should annually assess ourselves. It's not costing us anything except the time of our staff, but really for us to be able to go back to researchers at the beginning of the year and say, well, for 2027, we find ourselves at one or other level, but it's more about, does that honest reflection shape how we then improve our systems so that we can deliver on the grants that we're wanting to do? And we can also then go after the grants which we know will have the capabilities in order to satisfy both the scientific imperative as well as what we are doing within the support systems. And so I'm concluding now. What I've given you is a snapshot of what I see as the elements that would make up the research DVC R&I portfolio. What I want to emphasize, we have the opportunity here, not simply to increase our research outputs. It's about strengthening the alignment between our people, our systems, our funding, and also our intellectual pursuits. The strategy that I've shown you is one path in which we can do that, and that is to strengthen our research systems, develop our talent pool, enabling systems that we have to work on, and financial sustainability. So we take this, they are not independent pillars as I've outlined, but they really weave into realizing our IOP ambitions. I think now we definitely have an opportunity to align all these. And my role as a DVC would be to help lead that alignment. And I wish to do that both conceptually as well as an implementation exercise. Thank you.
For the very lucid and clear line of argument pursued throughout the presentation. We have a 10-minute opportunity for Q&A, and I'd like to ask anybody in our audience to put up a hand and ask the first question. Prof?
You mentioned, maybe I understand, you mentioned very briefly when you talked about the pipeline and focused on the postdoctoral. Mentioned the importance of our senior staff. Maybe just to focus that even more, we've just had this huge influx of Saatchi chairs. What's that going to mean? How are we going to use that in a meaningful way to advance the university?
Yeah, thanks. And so I agree with you. And I think what I was pointing out here is the intention of supporting that full pipeline. I think in this influx of Saatchi chairs, if we take the position, which I framed here, that strengthening various components of this research ecosystem, the Saatchi chairs at one level become an opportunity to help support the emerging researchers as well. So I've had a Saatchi chair for 15 years. And what I discovered, you had the opportunity to infuse within this program a range of researchers, students. And I think what the funding does, and I think we need to maybe just dispel the notion that you have all the funding that you need. I think it provides a catalyst with which to try and leverage additional funding. And so what these funding pots do for us is they provide a starting point through which we can leverage funding. Because as you know, and I don't need to tell this community, is that our emerging researchers find themselves in actually quite a tough position in that funders want to see a track record. Funders are risk averse. They want to know if they're giving you money that it will succeed. And so as an emerging researcher, you are faced with, I should have the track record, and I don't have it yet, but I want the money in order to build that track record. And as leading researchers, including the Saatchis that you mentioned in your example, how do those then become the ways in which we can partner with our emerging research in order to drive and grow their career development? And one example, maybe more specifically, if you look at the Wellcome Trust has a program which is exclusively for early career researchers. But your grant cannot be submitted with a clear definition and plan of how a senior scholar is going to mentor and provide assistance to the early researcher through the life cycle of that funding. And so there again, as we focus on our senior scholars, how are they being pulled into these funding opportunities? And these are exceptionally good money. How do we pull them into these funding opportunities so that we can then grow the early or emerging researchers?
Thank you. Other questions? And then on this side of the room, so
Where are we now?
I think let's begin with Prof. Anita and Dr. Ramesh, and then Prof.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much, Prof. Christoffels, for your very insightful presentation. As you know, owing to austerity measures, we've in effect bled the academy, and this has led to staffing shortages in departments and the juniorization of many departments across the institution. This has a direct implication in terms of our research capacity as well as our postgraduate supervision capacity. And I wondered how that informs your strategy in terms of what you want to achieve.
Thanks very much. And I think that is a reality that we faced, and which is why in positioning the activities of the DVCR&I office, one thing that is not the solution is loads of money right now. I think it's a process. We are embarking on an IOP where we are wanting to define what a leading research university is. And so recognizing the challenges on the ground, what does that mean for us to facilitate the ability to get the funding, to get the staffing increases? We don't have it. These people will not arrive. We have to provide the systems in order to allow us to actually produce the kind of successful grant applications in order to strengthen our support for our current PhD students. We have to ensure that our systems that we claim are embedded in all our strategy documents actually breathe life into the university. And so, yes, we don't have the necessary to get all our departments going. For me, the portfolio in the DVCR&I is to strengthen our systems and to align them so that we can create the mechanism through which we can secure the resources which we need.
You're covered, so Prof. Pethel on this side.
Thanks, Prof. Christoffels. The method that's been plaguing us for a few years now is our meeting targets for postgraduate enrollment and then ensuring that they graduate in time. And we haven't yet, managed to attend to it sufficiently. What would you do differently to attend to that issue?
So let me start out by saying that I've encountered exactly the same challenges with my cohort. I think what I certainly recognize is the challenges that our students are encountering, and particularly in the space where I am, where you are trying to have a hybrid student that boosts the analytical capabilities, but also having the key skill set in order to drive the research. And so at a strategic level, it is wanting to support the division of postgrad studies. I think at the end of the day, no matter how sophisticated our strategy is, students don't have money. We are not providing at an early enough time the funding for our students. And so when we're supporting the division of postgrad studies, how are we aligning recruitment with what's happening around the country? Because we are all competing for the same pool of students. And so making sure that we can tap into the recruitment process early enough. And I have staff inundating me with, the money's coming too late. We need it earlier. And so how do we align our processes in order to shift that opportunity in order to tap into our students, our challenge of actually completions in time? And I think that is both a reflection on how our students are managing as well as in relation to how we're providing the supervisory capacity. And I think we are all faced with the difficulty of people are constrained by spending far too much time doing the particular administration. They're running away from a core responsibility of student supervision. And so supporting the divisions within the DVC RNI, where we clearly articulate how each division is going to support the mandate, and in relation to your question, supporting the postgraduate students and the completion. And I think that is what I would like to see at the end of the day. What becomes our plan? I've counted 7 strategic documents. I've read 6. I gave up on the 7th. But that is because we need to translate that into an intentional plan of how we're going to deliver. In the context of your question, how we're delivering on both the postgraduate completions and also meeting our targets.
Saw the notes that came up for 1 minute, and I don't know whether anybody has a 60-second question and Prof. Allen has a 10-second answer. So let's see. Prof. Fiona?
Very quick question. So we all know that in order to become the leading research institute we want to be, we need to provide a more enabling research environment. But tackling the wicked problems, the wicked institutional problems of that enabling research environment, it's quite a challenge. How would you address that?
So I think a quick answer with my 10 seconds is that, the challenge we have in this portfolio is expectation. We are shifting to an IOP that wants to drive itself and define itself being this leading research university. And so we have to fix everything at the same time. We have to deliver on everything at the same time. And so for me, how do we deal with that wicked problem? Every researcher needs to know that within the DVC RNI portfolio, PTO office is going to deliver on one aspect of that wicked problem. The research and development office is going to deliver on that. Our discussions with the other portfolios, finance, the DVC academic, these have to be aligned and they have to be communicated to our staff. In fact, communicated to our staff and students. I think so that we really all accept the responsibility of actually driving this process forward and managing our expectations. I think that's going to be key. That's more than 10 minutes.
Prof. Allen, thank you so much for the presentation this morning and also for taking us through your sense of what it would mean to grow into leadership as an institution that needs to chart a path in terms of the IOP. We really appreciate the preparation that went into putting all the data together and also into putting the thinking together to articulate a vision of progressive development. I want to conclude this part of the interview process by formally thanking Prof for making himself available and also to our audience for putting the questions together. Please remember we have an opportunity to pose any additional questions by email. You can send these through to the registrar up to 12 o'clock today. And on that note, Prof, we want to wish you well. We will be in touch with you through our HR division and take matters from there. Thank you so much, Prof. Christoffels. Let's give Prof a round of applause. Before we move on to welcome our second candidate, would people like a 1 minute stretch break, not to leave the room, just to stretch and stand up a bit, and then we move on to the next presentation, a 1 minute stretch break, just to grab a water, grab a coffee, and come back into the room.
Okay. Okay. All right.
So that I don't pull the exactly and pull what the lady and then say sorry man can I just
Okay, welcome back, everybody. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our second candidate this morning, who's just running 2 minutes later, so we have 2 minutes to spare. Welcome, Prof. Musa. Please come forward. It's an enormous pleasure to introduce to you this morning Prof. Musa Vuyisile Mabandla. Prof. Musa comes from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, where I was, but I'm declaring upfront my bias. Prof. Musa is a professor of physiology and a seasoned academic leader who recently completed his second term as Dean of the College of Health Sciences at UKZN. With over 20 years in the sector and 17 years in leadership, he has a reputation as a change agent. At UKZN, he oversaw the dramatic transformation in research output, moving a school from 0 PhD graduates to 20 in just 5 years, and has been at the forefront of decolonizing the curricula to focus on primary healthcare and innovation. Prof. Mabandla's vision for the DVC portfolio is deeply pragmatic. His views on research and innovation as the engine for a university's survival in a research and resource-scarce environment will be shared with us. He is passionate about moving beyond traditional teaching to produce graduates who are not just employees, but employers and future innovators. He believes in dreaming big, as they say, to make UWC a dominant research power, and we are eager to hear how he plans to lead us there. Very warm welcome to Prof. Mabandla.
Thank you.
So, Prof, we have a timekeeper who's in the front row who will guide you along in terms of keeping time, and after that we will have an opportunity for about a 10-minute Q&A with
All
you.
right.
Thank you.
I just need my bag because my glasses are in the
Oh, yes, yes. So please get the bag with the spectacles in. Yes, this is the screen, and here's the.
Thank you. How's your travel? It was, but I had maybe it's sluggish. I had a bit of food poisoning last night, so I didn't have a good night. Yeah.
Probably also more.
That is all.
Gonna be fine.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You can tell I just need the glasses. Okay. Okay. Good morning. Thank you for having me as part of this process, and hopefully, I will do my best to share my vision with you. As I was talking to the rector, if I do appear a bit sluggish, I've just come down with something of late that is affecting me, but I should be fine. I should be fine. All right. As I said, good morning. Oh, sorry for that. So, world-class universities seek to look at the needs of their communities and leverage that to present society with a way forward. This includes advances in health, policy, and lately in artificial intelligence-driven technology in alignment with the fourth industrial revolution. As a country with a history of inequality and a struggling economy, we face many challenges, including issues of transformation, health inequality, and social justice. Resources are not fully directed towards the academic project. Therefore, we must focus on innovation and policy development as major drivers of commercialization, digital transformation, and industry income. The university is not competing on an equal footing for gifted students and academics with better resourced universities. Sorry, I keep missing. UWC is a university that aspires to be research-led and responsive to the needs of the community and the changing world. To be recognized as such, research leadership must inform teaching and must focus on innovation and translational research. As a publicly funded university, are we providing the training that the public needs or what we think is best for the public? In the face of the realities of declining government support, an increase in student debt, and a decrease in per capita funding for the higher education sector, how do we become sustainably competitive? So what are the identifiable challenges? It's financial constraints with unpredictability in government funding allocation, a decline in international funding support, infrastructure limitations, supervision capacity limitations, and not being the university of choice for top researchers. Also, a weak brand awareness or image. Also compounding this is the fact that we live in an age of tariffs, global warming and related diseases, technological challenges, unemployment, and wars. Locally, this impacts treasury budgeting, hence the university block grant. Internationally, this impacts NIH funding and other US government regulated funds. Possible tariff wars and the rise in the right-wing ideology in the EU and elsewhere may impact EU-related grants. This leads to a flight of top academics if we are not the university of choice. There are positives, however, as this gives us the opportunity to reimagine collaborations by focusing on pivoting to other markets, particularly in the global south. And we must always make sure that we must align our areas of interest and not be because of available partnerships. Now, if we look at the research output report for the university, we see that there is a steady increase in outputs and NRF-related researchers. There's marginal increase in third stream funding. There are efforts to move towards the fourth industrial revolution. However, as you can see, my apologies, I'm not sure why this is not working well. But as you can see, we are having challenges. We need to target where outputs must be increased, promote industry engagement, strongly support grant acquisition through the research office, spotlight strong postgraduate student enrollment and completion, establish an innovation and commercialization program,
and also encourage AI technology development. As we see, we need to move from sitting where we are to be one of the top university if we want to realize the Project 2035 strategy. Now, when we look at university rankings, the commonly viewed university world rankings by major universities are the Times Higher Education, the QS World, as well as the CWUR. Now, when we look at the Times Higher Education ratings, we see that the university sits in the 400 to 600 range and in the 100 to 200 range for reduced inequalities, which is quite good. We have dropped from the 800 to the 1,000 range in good health and well-being. What is clear, though, is that the university is mostly on the right track. Limitation may include a lack of critical mass of researchers in areas that the university wants to focus on. So if we look at the measures used, we can see that there's work to be done in teaching, research environment, as well as industry understanding. However, the university is on the right track when you look at the quality of research, as well as the international outlook. So we need to increase quality postgraduate student enrollment, improve research infrastructure, writing skills, the quality supervision capacity. We have to have targeted capacitation of researchers, targeted partnerships in the private sector, work on the innovation and internationalization portfolios, and show graduation in reasonable time. So what are the enablers? We must invest in disciplined research and strongly support interdisciplinary research. We need to invest in applied research and flagship projects. We must invest in research impact and transformation as identified by the university strategic plan. And we also need to invest in an institute. For this, we need to strengthen research ethos and structures, ensure that there are strong links between the faculties and University Central. We must provide assistance for our postgraduate students, ensure that we have linkages with industry, government, as well as other institutions. And all of this is to ensure that we have high impact research, as well as excellent innovation and entrepreneurship as what we are looking forward to. Now, when you're looking at innovation and entrepreneurship, to be effective in the fourth industrial revolution era, we must develop targeted research areas. These must correspond to the needs of the sector and industry. In other words, we can't just develop things that are not necessarily of interest out there to the industry. We must focus on the attributes of our graduates and not just throughput. We must ensure that we have programs focused on increasing employers and not employees, produce graduates that are enterprising and entrepreneurial, that will create a different kind of postgraduate students, one that is focused on translational research. In terms of enhancing research, we have to develop centers of excellence, and this requires strengthening infrastructure. We have to encourage collaborations, review high teaching workloads. There must be targeted recruitment in line with the needs, particularly at the senior level. We have to increase research impact by increasing visibility. We have to strengthen research integrity, emphasize on quality research outputs, NRF ratings, and strong collaborations. We need to facilitate PhD credentialing for staff and partner with other institutions in increasing the number of PhD supervisors, as well as our research expertise. And we must ensure that we have a vigilant student and thesis management system that can pick up negative trends quite early. When we look at postgraduate studies, we have to ensure that we grow our timber in the context of the UWC brand. We have to ensure that we produce nimble postgraduates, afford room for academic training during postgraduate studies. We have to intensify specialized writing workshops, create statistics proficient postgraduates, while we provide postgraduate support via a research hub as well as a PhD academy. We have to discourage postdoctoral fellowships in the same labs that you trained in, and we need to encourage a move towards translational research. And when we look at our early career researchers, we need to have a proper retention strategy one that recognizes and manages talent. It must ensure that not every promising researcher is channeled towards the leadership pipeline. We have to have a clear pipeline and post-credentialing strategy for the academy. So we need to have onboarding processes that are aligned to the strategic plan. We have to support conference attendance as well as lab visits and other enablers for success. These researchers must be paired with established researchers in project management. We need to have periodic review of supervision competence and introduce workshops that target specific gaps. We have to promote communication via targeted emails for growth enabling projects. And we need to ensure periodic meetings with line managers and promote mentorship by competent supervisors. We must strategically attract a core of researchers who will contribute to the research agenda that supports the mission of the university. Talent acquisition can include upskilling, recruitment, the appointment of fractional as well as research professors, as well as collaborations. We have to ensure that we retain researchers who are leaders in their fields, emphasize on quality research output in high quartile journals. We must promote ratings applications with the target being high C and B ratings, and we need to actively support potential P and A ratings. We need to have a focused internationalization agenda, but we cannot get there without establishing centers of excellence. Now, for effective delivery of the enrollment plan, there must be a strong institutional intelligence office, one that monitors enrollment plans, progression, and graduation throughput. There must be a strategy to get rid of bottlenecks, annual progress reports, and we need to establish a doctoral academy that will result in the careful selection of students. We must ensure there's strategic implementation through performance management, clear articulation of plans, and if necessary, mid-year reviews for KPIs. We must ensure that our innovation activities align with both institutional goals as well as national priorities. And we must ensure that our awards office support big grant applications. Now, when we talk of centers of excellence, we have to develop units, centers that promote interdisciplinarity, that cuts across faculties. We have to capacitate existing units and centers, including consolidating the upstream, downstream value chain in preclinical as well as clinical trials units. In the era of global warming, working together becomes critical. We have to champion the formation of flagships with a clear end goal. I was the facilitating dean in developing a center of excellence that is a world leader in the COVID-19 fight, and now other zoonotic and tropical diseases. Our main research stakeholders are the Department of Higher Education Training, Science and Innovation, as well as the Department of Health in the public sector. In partnership with them, we need to expand the scope of work with the private sector, municipalities and communities, where there can be specific projects that are not in the current MOUs. As a research leader on innovation and policy, the university must consider establishing an institute that will spearhead research in the province and beyond. The institute will have to reflect the scope of work in the university and the province, including translational research, confluence health, environment and climate change, population and infectious disease, health economics, health inequality and social justice, including women's health, poverty, inequality, food security, migration, and big data. The institute must contribute in meeting the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the National Development Plan 2030, and the Africa Agenda 2063. However, we cannot be competitive as a university without meaningful funding. Sources of external funds to the university include national and international funding agencies, the alumni. We need to ensure that we generate third-stream funding through IPs, product development, and service provisions. We need to ensure that we attract interested donors and benefactors who can contribute to the UWC Foundation. This requires an increase in the number of enterprising PhD credential staff. We have to develop a cohort of postdoctoral fellows in policy relevant research, innovation, and entrepreneurship. A focused program of communicating achievements beyond internal communiques and local media. We must ensure that we promote grantsmanship, entrepreneurship, related research. And we must make sure that our graduates are our best ambassadors through posts on TikTok, IG stories, Facebook, as well as in reviews. There needs to be a clear funding model aligned to the strategic plan and action, that is action through KPIs. This includes a zero budget strategy, government partnerships and engagement with industry, partnerships with NGOs and international collaborators, fund providers such as international development agencies. We must ensure that the strategic plan and risk indicators factor in possible community and donor fatigue, decrease in available funding, an imbalance in staff workload leading to strategy misalignment. We must be aware of possible internal as well as external stakeholder risks. Fundamentally, we are not an institution without our students. We cannot change who we are without them buying into where we want to go. We need to recruit properly, not with an eye of being exclusive, but with an eye of ensuring that we meet our mission as an institution that is forward-looking. And when the students are here, we need to ensure that we give them the tools to be the best they can be by providing a wholesome student experience. So when we look at institutional values, we have to understand our staff and what they are capable of. We have to understand how to make them buy into the idea of making the university one of choice so that it is recognizable. We have to understand how we can work together to get there. We have to understand who we are. To be internationally competitive, we must be nationally relevant. We need to promote conference attendance where riveting innovative findings are presented. We must encourage our academics to be active and leaders in their learned societies, including international home societies. They need to be leaders in areas of research that are uniquely ours. We must be aware of where we publish and the quality of the work that we publish. We need to have a professoriate that is reflective of our values and aspirations. And we need to effectively communicate our accomplishments. When we look at the research portfolio, it needs to provide an enabling environment. It must be proactive in signing MOUs with universities that will promote global relevancy for UWC. It must seek international partners that will advance UWC's mission. It must work with teaching and learning in developing policies that align to UWC's goals. It must support the development of unit centers and institutes by providing enabling policies. It must be able to act quickly when researchers are awarded big grants. Now, when you reimagine the research portfolio, you have the DVC research having oversight of research and postgraduate degrees, research strategy implementation. It is responsible for overseeing coordination of research and community engagement initiatives. And then you must think of it as having two arms, the research office as well as the innovation and entrepreneurship arm. And in terms of coordination, you need to have faculty committees working in hand with the faculty board and vice versa. You need to have a faculty board that reports to the University Research Committee that is chaired by the DVC. And that committee reports to Senate that is chaired by the Vice-Chancellor. The research office must monitor research productivity, the awarding of grants. It must lobby for establishing and renewing of such chairs so that they can support and also support academics that are ready to apply. It must monitor research funding. It must ensure that there are functional ethics committees, ensures that libraries work well, and it must investigate the capacity and the need for a UWC press. When we look at innovation and entrepreneurship, this office must drive innovation strategy, capacity development, and partnerships. It must assist in project design. It must provide support to the innovative program within the undergraduate curriculum. It must assist with entrepreneurship, including student entrepreneurship. And it must provide early career support and develop strategic partnerships. So in terms of innovation and entrepreneurship, you can look at it as having these two arms, capacity development and the innovation hub. With capacity development, it must promote internal, national, and international strategic partnership in line with the strategic plan and understanding how to form startup companies. It must support early career and emerging researchers through support with research rates, funding support to enhance research skills, formal mentorship support, as well as targeted induction projects. And it must promote interdisciplinary research. When we look at the Innovation Hub, it must focus on understanding innovation ideation. It must strengthen the technology transfer and the business development offices in line with the fourth industrial revolution. It must promote student entrepreneurship and also support in understanding funding requirements for creating spin-out companies. With the strategy, the aim must be to transform communities, support SME development, identify local partners in entrepreneurship, must be involved in rapid diagnostic tests, ensure quality healthcare, including units on interprofessional education, and it must assist with drug and vaccine development. And I'm including this part because of my background in health sciences and medicine. However, there are other fields that can be explored as well. Okay. In terms of external collaboration and innovation, the universities are spaces of exchange of ideas and research in pursuit of knowledge advancement. To succeed, they need to be connected to institutions with the best minds globally, while anchored in the communities they represent. In the South African context, there needs to be a balance between internationalization and social redress. We have seen the importance of internationalization in the fight against past as well as recent pandemics. We must advocate for open science, increase visibility in AI research, promote digitalization and big data systems, and this also applies to teaching and learning in the fourth industrial revolution era. And in terms of internationalization, we must form strategic global partnerships, good networks and collaborations, student exchange programs. We need to promote staff mobility for mutual benefit. And we must ensure that we internationalize research as well as teaching and learning. Now, to become a leading research-led university, this cannot be done all at once. There needs to be different timeframes for delivering on the mandate. So, for example, if we look at short term, we have to strengthen the research office functioning, digitalization, research infrastructure, and capacity. For mid-term, we have to strengthen the capacity, community and innovation ecosystem, research office. And as a long term, the project is to work towards Project 2035. We must ensure strong governance structures that promote collaborative leadership and accountability. We must promote ethical governance and a proper community engagement policy. We must have a national and international footprint, including policy-relevant research. We must empower and have progressive staff that is reflective of the university brand. There must be financial sustainability and a full participation in the fourth industrial revolution era. We need to have targeted grantsmanship and strategic partnerships. When we look at branding, we must emphasize on strategic marketing and communicating excellent achievements rather than be defined by what others report about us. We are a university in the 21st century that is not held up by being defined as a historically disadvantaged institution. My strategy as DVC is to ensure that there is better synergy between undergraduate and the postgraduate program. We need to actively promote being student-centric and improve student experience. We must fully embrace translational research, innovation, and entrepreneurship. So why is it possible? I have previously developed a research strategy. I have transformed the school's equity and gender profile. I have encouraged the professionalization of the support staff. We have increased the number of staff with PhDs to an extent that they are constantly poached and some become research scholars in top-ranked universities. We have increased the number of papers published and papers published in high impact journals, the number of rated researchers, the number of grants raised. We have successfully developed a transformative curriculum that focuses on innovation, entrepreneurship, and commercialization. And through a university consortium, we have already taken up a number of programs that will drive innovation. We must believe in ourselves, and as no one else will believe in us. We must match our expectations with the competence, courage, and determination to succeed. This was a quote from Rosalind Yalo, who won the 1977 Nobel Prize. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Mabandla, and for the very insightful prioritization of matters that would, once put together, would lead to the growth anticipated to become a leading research institution. We have 10 minutes for some Q&A, and I'd like to know who wants to ask the first question. Mr. Kasembe, you are a member of the SACC, so we'll have an opportunity later in our process to ask questions. There's a question at the back of the room on that side.
Good morning. Thank you for your presentation. Tell me, with regards to your implementation of AI, that's a very interesting thing, because I think we have 4 questions that very importantly stare us in the face. And the first one is determining the truthful utilization of AI in the context of what students are doing with it. That being the first one. I'd like to know your strategy for that. Secondly, the approach on the sound utilization of AI for automation. Because if we don't take a sound approach to doing it and utilizing it for automating certain things in a way, we'll have competitors that far surpass us way faster because of their utilization of AI. Then thirdly, my other question would be, what strategy do you have for AI utilization where the institution implements AI, because it requires substantial electricity. Electricity affects our global warming footprint, our carbon footprint, and all these things. What's your approach to that? And then finally, what safeguards do you intend to implement to ensure that harnessing AI will not give us outputs that involve AI hallucinations and compromise our approach to things academic as well as otherwise?
Thanks very much, Prof, for the 4 questions in one. I'm not going to ask Prof Mabandla to answer all 4, because we do want to also allow for some members of the audience to ask other questions, but we'll make a note of all 4 questions, and the registrar is here to make sure that these will be addressed. So, Prof Mabandla, you're welcome to answer any one of the 4 questions, and then I want to ask someone else.
Now, thank you for the questions. So, whenever you are in a leadership position, the first thing that you need to do is to ensure that you have capable people that are experts in the fields that you want to implement. I'm not here to change the world, so to speak, but rather to work with people in terms of how do we progress as a university. As you are aware, just now, the previous week, the government had to withdraw a policy that was put forward for AI, which therefore tells us that there are still areas that we need to work on. I think the critical part that we need to look at, though, is your first question in terms of how to ensure that we protect the university's integrity by ensuring that we have policies that will guard against, in essence, we have guardrails that will guard against the abuse of AI by students or even staff. So again, in that space, one has to look at what is happening, what are other partners out there doing. And so therefore, when we decide to have a policy as UWC, that it fits with the kind of student that we have, with the issues that we've identified as challenges against guarding against AI. So I think that would be.
Thank you. Other questions from the audience? Prof, on this side? Over here?
Thank you, Prof. Mwantla, for your presentation. You did touch on this in the presentation, but I want to probe on it a little further. UWC has been struggling to meet its postgraduate enrollment targets, and at the same time ensuring a sufficient number of postgraduate students graduate on time. If you were DVC at UWC, what would be your key strategies to address this challenge?
So the reason why I had the slide on branding, as well as the slide on that the university is not necessarily attracting top researchers or a critical mass of top researchers throughout, is something that we need to work on. We have to, so when I talked about ensuring that communication is not something that is done within the university, we need to ensure that we promote our successes so that people out there can know that there's a professor so and so who is a top rated or a lead researcher in a particular field. We must promote, for example, when I looked at the stats, I wasn't aware that UWC is actually doing as well as it is right now. And that is because the university may not have been promoting those successes. So for me, the question is we must have a targeted recruitment strategy. So to ensure that the university becomes a university of choice for both staff and students, we must communicate our achievements well. For an example, the work that is done with astronomy in the university. Now, you know of other universities that are actually in that field, but actually the university is doing quite well in that sphere. So hence, I think we need to promote better so that we recruit better.
Thank you very much. Other questions?
Thanks, Prof. Mbandla. I'm David Holt. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Natural Sciences. My question, you spoke a lot about the things that we must do. I wanted to pull you down to the people. And in particular, you alluded to a little in your answer to the last question about the senior researchers. Quite often, they are left to do their thing because that's in a certain sense where they're happiest. But within your strategy, these things that we must do, how will you harness the senior researchers, our top researchers, because you can't do it all alone? What's their role?
So thanks for that question. I think the first thing when you come into a new setup is to understand the culture, and then you look at what are the strengths and the weaknesses. So, for example, as you are saying that you may find that there's a silo mentality where researchers do their own thing. And you can't come and just say, this is how I will use a stick to change that culture. But you have to work with people so that they understand why are we all here. We are not here for ourselves. We are here to push the national agenda, to push the university's agenda. And so through negotiations and understanding where are the issues that might be holding us back to push the agenda that will ensure that we are all working towards the same direction. So that would be the first thing that one would do, is to listen. And then through that listening, then we create a strategy of saying, okay, this is not working well. Natural science is not working well because of A, B, C, and D. How do I then, together with the national science people, try and find the strategy of understanding while we are here? So I mentioned in my presentation that when I came in, and we were developing this innovation and entrepreneurship program. So when we came in, we were saying that, okay, we need to do away with the medical sciences program as is, and we develop it in a better way. And there were people that were there longer than I've been there. So there was not that real buy-in because people tend to stick to what they know best. But through making sure that people understand and what is the drive that you're doing, then that's how you get people engaged. Yes, there may be people that will never change, but in terms of a university, there needs to be a culture that says, as this particular university, this is our research ethos, this is our culture, and we need to work together to drive the 2035 strategy. And sometimes you may win some, sometimes you may not, but we have to try. And so again, I'll start by saying you listen and find those challenges and see what would entice people to sort of fit that vision that the Vice-Chancellor is pushing and the research office is pushing, so that we drive in that direction together.
Okay. There's one question on that side.
Good morning. Thank you, Prof, for your very insightful presentation. You spoke quite strongly and emphatically about bringing in internationalization in terms of supporting the research agenda. So my question is, what do you believe are some of the key elements of the focused internationalization agenda that you spoke about that will help us advance towards a leading research university by 2040? Thank you.
Okay. So first of all, I would need to speak to the Vice-Chancellor because I understand that internationalization in that office currently. But we again need to look at our researchers, and we need to promote networking and collaboration. We must find sister universities that have the same outlook as we do, so that then we build this critical mass of researchers in the university that have strategic partners elsewhere. So that's why I was talking about that. We need to have a strategy. We need to form strategic partners with sister universities. So I think that's one way we drive. There's low hanging fruit where, for example, the university is doing quite well in certain areas. So that is our driver, but it doesn't necessarily mean that where the university is not doing as well as it should, then we're going to say, oh, let's just leave that to our leading stars and the others don't. Hence, those strategic partners become impossible. What is the university's strategy for 2035? Then we focus on those kinds of sister universities elsewhere that have a similar outlook with us. So in essence, one of my first slides was talking about pivoting towards the global south. So one of the things that has happened is we tend to have a situation where even though we are PIs, we tend to be the junior partners because we have to follow the funding mandate of countries out there or our partner research. So we need to change that focus and say, okay, these are the issues that impact us more in the global south. So how do we then identify those partners that will work with us so that we have this internationalization agenda that we want to drive?
Thank you very much, Prof. Mabandla. We've come to the end of the Q&A time. If there are additional questions, please do email them through to the Registrar's Office up to 12 o'clock today, and we'll make sure that these also have an opportunity to be ventilated later. Prof. Mabandla, thank you so very much for the presentation and for also making doing all that work to bring and coordinate, to synthesize all of that information regarding the priorities together. And we wish you well with the remainder of the process. The feedback will be provided through our HR division, but of course, we also have an opportunity for an interview later in our program with you. So let's thank Prof. Mabandla for presence. Okay, I promised a 2-minute stretch the first time and then it took 4 minutes. Can we go for a compromise 3-minute stretch and then back in the room for the next for the next part of the interviews, please? 3-minute stretch, everyone.
Morning, good morning. How are you? Hello, how are you? Is it fine to just use this motto?
Yes, you could. I just want to show you the ticket. It's on. You can navigate your presentation as you will. Cool. Right. So that's it. That's on. Yeah.
Can I just try?
Oh, that's the.
Oh, okay. I think I should take my jacket off for that. Okay. Thank you. Hello. How are you?
Both going to use this? Or do you want the hand?
Going to use that. Okay. I just want to make sure. I'm not sure whether it's hot or cold.
Let's settle. Okay. I think we have everybody in the room. Okay. It's a pleasure to be able to introduce Prof. Sarojini Nadar to our audience. Prof. Nadar is a scholar of immense international standing and a powerful voice for social justice within our university and beyond. As the director of the Desmond Tutu Center with a Tier 1 Saatchi chair, she has turned a vision for intersectional, socially consequential research into a reality. Beyond 100 plus publications and her B2 NRF rating, Prof. Nadar has sat at the highest levels of national research governance, including 2 terms as the NRF's Executive and Evaluations Committee. What sets Prof. Nadar's leadership apart is her conviction that governance should never just be about procedural compliance. It must serve the intellectual life of the university. Prof. Nadar has been instrumental in shaping critical dialogues at UWC, the intellectual home for the left. Her vision is to weigh research rather than just count it, ensuring that our systems support scholars and their development rather than obstructing them. We look much forward to the perspective on the future of research at UWC. Welcome, Prof. Nadar.
Good morning, colleagues, and thank you for the kind introduction, Professor Balfour. So I have been asked, with reference to the institutional operating plan, to do 2 things. First, to reflect on how we might define for ourselves what it means to be a leading research institution. And second, to explain how that ambition can be realized in practice. Now, for those of you who know me, I have a very cautious relationship with the language of alignment when we are pressured to be framework friendly, even when the fit is not quite there. My friends in funded NGOs call this the tyranny of the log frame. I have therefore approached the IOP not as a set of boxes into which institutional life must be squeezed, but as what the IOP describes itself to be, a dynamic planning instrument that invites critical engagement and requires thoughtful interpretation. So the vision I offer today is an attempt to think with the institution. And we are building on strong foundations here. The annual research reports over the last few years reveals that the university consistently produces close to 700 research output units annually. The number of NRF-rated researchers has grown from 155 in 2022 to 167 in 2024. External research income reached approximately 324 million in 2024. This is accompanied by significant investment in postgraduate formation, including over 126 million in bursary support. Alongside this, UWC's partnerships extend across more than 40 countries. I'm sorry, there seems to be a feedback on this, maybe. Is this better? Okay, sorry. So the task before us is not to invent a research culture, but to strengthen one that is already in motion. So given this, allow me to state my vision for the DVC position clearly. My vision is to strengthen My vision is to strengthen UWC as a leading research institution, one that is grounded in quality and excellence, that is attentive to social and scholarly significance, that is strategic in its partnerships and reach, that is committed to the formation of the next generation of scholars, and supported by responsive institutional systems. These 5 elements structure my vision and this presentation. 2 are intellectual anchors, excellence and significance. 3 are institutional enablers, what I call reach, regeneration, and responsiveness. Together, they guide us towards a leading research university. And so I begin with excellence. I begin with excellence because it is the first priority in any serious account of a leading research institution. When we describe ourselves only as research-led, this can and often does very quickly collapse into shorthand for higher outputs, increased subsidy, improved rankings, basically more, more, more. And while these indicators have their place, the danger is that we begin to confuse the measure for the meaning. But a leading research institution cannot be led by productivity alone. It must be guided by excellence. And so I define research excellence as work that is contextually grounded, intellectually rigorous, and original enough to shift how we think. It is knowledge that is meaningful. It leaves us asking, what do we know now that we did not know before? However, measuring excellence only by the number of outputs we produce puts excellence at risk. Here, the economist Charles Goodhart offers a useful warning. When a measure becomes a target, he says, it ceases to be a good measure. Kian Tomaselli shows how this distortion plays out in practice in his analysis of South African academic publishing. Systems of measurement can generate what he calls perverse incentives, salami slicing research into minimal publishable units, sometimes literally into Part A and Part B, repeating similar arguments across multiple outputs, or favoring incremental work over independent outputs. This tension is intensified in a moment shaped by artificial intelligence. And so while AI can accelerate certain forms of work, it cannot substitute for the intellectual labor at the heart of research. The risk with AI is not simply speed, but the illusion that speed is equivalent to insight. The result is that outputs accumulate, but depth and rigor are thin. So we need a richer account of excellence, one that cannot be reduced to speed or volume alone. And this is where Isabel Stangers, a feminist philosopher of science, offers an important intervention. Trained as a chemist, she worked alongside Nobel Prize-winning physical chemist Ilya Prigogine. Now, I want to pause here to say that I mentioned her background because the moment I used that F word, feminist, to describe her, I know some of you may have quietly assumed that her work is non-academic. And I get that all the time as a feminist researcher. So let me be clear. Her work is firmly situated within scholarly practice. In her book, Another Science is Possible, a manifesto for slow science, she argues that contemporary research is governed by urgency, speed, competition, and immediate results. What this erodes, she argues, is the capacity to hesitate. And for Stangers, Hesitation is not inefficiency. It is the condition of thinking. It allows us to take what law professor Khalid El-Fadel calls a conscientious pause. Hence, when she speaks of slow science, she's not only advocating for a slower pace, as important as a slower pace may be for those of us who sometimes teeter on the brink of academic burnout often. She's saying that slow science is more careful scholarship, and careful scholarship is excellent scholarship. The challenge then is not to choose between productivity and excellence, but it is to ensure a balance between quantity, because we must generate sufficient outputs to financially sustain the institution, and quality, because it sustains the intellectual integrity of the institution. And this leads me to the second intellectual anchor. Not only whether our work is excellent, but what that excellence does. And that is the question of significance. When I speak of significance and relevance, I am asking a deceptively simple question. So what? What is our research telling us that we did not know before? And more importantly, how is our research taken up and made to matter? Significance unfolds along two axes. Within the academy, where influence is visible through citations, and beyond the academy, where research enters public, policy, and economic life in more complex ways. So let us explore both in turn. First, academic significance. Within the academy, impact is often measured by whether your work is read and cited by other scholars. Now, to assess UWC citation impact, I draw on Web of Science data via Clarivate Insights. Now, I must make a disclaimer before I share the statistics. This metric is limited. It privileges global North journals, underrepresents books and community-engaged work, and it also varies by discipline. Yet it remains central to global visibility, and therefore, like all metrics, it must be read critically. So with that disclaimer in mind, let us look at the statistics. Between 2021 and 2025, UWC produced 5,935 Web of Science Index publications, placing it 10th out of 26 public universities nationally. However, when we shift from the number of outputs to the academic uptake, a truly remarkable picture emerges. One that has largely gone unnoticed. This slide shows the category normalized citation impact, which adjusts for discipline and other factors across all 26 public universities in South Africa. The horizontal red line that you see marks the global average at 1. Anything above that line indicates above average global citation impact. UWC, represented by the vertical red line, stands at 2. This places UWC at the top of the national system in terms of citation impact, even ahead of historically privileged institutions such as UCT, which is sitting at 1.8. In other words, while we produce fewer outputs than some of our peers, the work we do produce travels further and shapes global scholarly conversations more decisively. Now, this is a strong story of impact, and it is a story of excellence. I once heard that when Times Higher Education ranked UWC's physics and astronomy departments as number 1 in Africa, an academic at a certain university, which shall remain unnamed, but it may be at the foot of the mountain, tweeted fake news. Clearly, that academic could not believe that academics at UWC could transcend apartheid's intentions to limit Black intellectual labor and emerge as number one in Africa. And yet, many years later, these statistics here say otherwise. Our outputs may be fewer, but our impact leads. But citations do not exhaust the question of significance. If this is how our work travels within the academy, we must also ask how it moves beyond the academy. Because research may travel widely in journals and conferences, but it may still remain distant from the lives it seeks to change. At UWC, our identity as an intellectual home for the left shapes what we count as meaningful scholarship, holding knowledge and justice together, as seen in positions such as our Senate and Council stance on Palestine. Impact, then, is consequence. Does our work inform policy or change understanding? It is also important to say that not all impact is immediate. In fields like English literature and mathematics, its value is more foundational in building the deeper frameworks through which we come to understand and interpret the world. So, in summary, if excellence and significance are what makes research worthwhile, then the question is, how is that research excellence and significance institutionally enabled? And then this brings me to the three institutional enablers, what I have called reach, regeneration, and responsiveness. So reach is about how our research travels and with what impact. In the contemporary university, this is often framed through the language of internationalization, though it cannot be restricted to it, especially because internationalization can sometimes become a description of movement without meaning. It can tell us that we are traveling, that we are collaborating and signing agreements without asking whether that movement is intellectually or socially significant. In my vision, partnerships must extend our intellectual anchors of excellence and significance. These anchors must shape how research circulates within our institution and how it generates influence across local, continental, and global contexts. And I want to suggest three ways in which we can do this more intentionally through three interlinked shifts. The first is institutional partnerships and transdisciplinary reach. The second is international partnerships and epistemic equity. And the third is local reach and community engagement. So let me begin at home with institutional partnerships. Before we reach outward, we need to be more deliberate about how we partner with the institution. Take our citation impact, which I just referred to. It is twice the global average and higher than both UCT and Stellenbosch University. That is a real strength. But it is also uneven. When we look more closely, we see that this impact is concentrated in a small number of fields, particularly space science and parts of the health and social sciences. So the question is, how do we build from that? I want to suggest that these high impact areas need not remain isolated pockets of excellence. They can anchor wider transdisciplinary collaboration across the institution. Now, let me be clear about what this entails. Transdisciplinary work brings disciplines into conversation around shared problems, integrating their distinct tools and ways of thinking to address complex questions. It is not a space for weak disciplinary grounding or opportunistic attachment to others' work. It depends on strength within a discipline that is then brought into rigorous engagement with other disciplines. Transdisciplinary reach is where this becomes institutional practice. Through co authored research, joint doctoral supervision, and problem focused research clusters, we can extend the conditions that have produced impact in some areas into others as well. So, if this first shift is about building from our internal strengths, the second is about how we partner internationally. And so, here I want to specifically address the context of North South partnerships and the question of epistemic equity. International partnerships cannot allow institutions, particularly in the global North, to determine what counts as knowledge or how it is produced. So let me offer a brief example. I recently co-supervised a joint PhD with a European university. The student was registered in the discipline of ethics at UWC and in the health sciences abroad. Alongside the thesis, we were required to produce 4 Q1 or Q2 journal articles. Now, there is value in this model of transdisciplinary supervision, but the project, which was grounded in a decolonial feminist framework, did not easily fit dominant health sciences publishing norms. After multiple rejections, because as you can imagine, reviewer number 2 had a lot to say, we eventually published all 4 articles. But what became clear, however, was that the epistemic terms of the work were not being set by UWC. Now, this is not unusual in North-South collaborations, and it is precisely why partnerships cannot rely on goodwill alone. They must be structured to recognize different knowledge traditions. If UWC is to move from international participation to agenda setting, then we must create our own intellectual spaces. One possibility is a UWC Institute for Advanced Study. And while we can learn from models like the Stellenbosch and Johannesburg Institutes for Advanced Study, our orientations towards socially just scholarship gives us a unique edge. So this then extends the question of partnership into one of local reach and community engagement, which is the final point in the section. The Department of Science and Innovation Decadal Plan, designed to implement the 2019 White Paper on Science, Technology and Innovation, and which was launched in 2022, introduces what it calls a whole of society approach to research. At its core, this signals a shift from viewing science and innovation as the responsibility of a single sector to understanding them as co-produced across society. In this model, knowledge is not confined to the university. It is shaped through interaction between academia, industry, government, civil society, and communities, and it is driven by societal challenges rather than disciplinary silos. Now, this is an important shift, but it requires careful interpretation. If taken at face value, this whole of society approach risks being reduced to outreach. But I think the whole of society approach calls us to a more fundamental possibility, and that is the co-creation of knowledge. Following decolonial theorists such as Linda Tuhiwai Smith, community engagement must be understood not as research on communities, but as research with them. This means embedding engagement within the research process itself, shaping the questions we ask, the methods we use, and the forms of knowledge we produce. To make this understanding of community engagement real, we need to build it into the UWC systems of recognition, where we resource and reward community engagement as a core dimension of academic work through workload models, promotion criteria, and internal funding. This is how engagement moves from aspiration to practice. And so the second institutional enabler is regeneration and formation. A leading research university must ask not only what we produce, but who will carry the work forward. I focus here on three interlinked areas again: postgraduate formation and early career mentorship, the teaching research nexus, and strategic funding. Postgraduate formation. The concept of epistemological access, developed by Wally Morrow, a former dean here at UWC, reminds us that for students and early career scholars, access is not just about entering the university. It is about being enabled to participate meaningfully in the university's ways of thinking, knowing, and producing knowledge. And this requires structured formation pathways across faculties that build communities of practice and sustain intellectual accountability. One way to strengthen such intellectual accountability is to institutionalize the doctoral defense. In a context where AI can accelerate writing, a doctoral defense ensures that candidates can account for their own work with depth and originality that cannot be automated. This continuum of formation extends into early career mentorship. And here I want to be clear. Mentorship is not a function to be outsourced to external coaches. It is a core academic responsibility through which the craft of scholarship is transmitted across generations, where early career scholars learn from established scholars how to shape a research trajectory, how to supervise, how to publish, and how to exercise intellectual leadership. Mentorship must therefore be formally recognized within promotion frameworks and workload models. Alongside this, we must strengthen the teaching research nexus. Formation cannot be confined to postgraduate study alone. It must be scaffolded across the academic trajectory. This requires a deliberate integration of teaching and research. Research must shape what happens in the undergraduate classroom, and the undergraduate classroom must be understood as the foundation of future research. Program and curriculum review should therefore demonstrate clearly how research informs teaching at all levels. This also requires that senior scholars remain visible in undergraduate teaching. One of my greatest gifts as an undergraduate student was being taught by professors who were leading researchers in their field. And this may sound a little bit nerdish, but I cannot explain the joy of watching an entry from your reference list walk into a classroom. The current drift, where foundational teaching is increasingly outsourced by senior scholars under productivity measures, obviously, to tutors and graduate assistants, risks weakening the intellectual base of the institution. A leading research university cannot outsource its teaching foundations. For this model of formation to be sustained, it must be resourced, which brings me to my final point in this section: funding. So at present, postgraduate and early career funding support relies on national instruments such as the National Research Foundation and internal funding linked to DHET subsidy. These remain essential, but they are not sufficient for expanding our postgraduate value proposition and global reach. We need a more outward-facing funding strategy, leveraging international partnerships for mobility, co-funded programs, and targeted support. The DVC Research Office must enable and support senior scholars to convert global scholarly networks into tangible development opportunities. Partnerships must move beyond co-publication to co-investment in people. Through these international initiatives for formation and regeneration, the university secures its future. And this brings me finally to the responsive systems that must sustain this work. The Senate Task Team report revealed a network of research systems that cause enormous frustration, from procurement to ethics and grant administration to fragmented digital platforms. Regrettably, these system issues erode time for core intellectual work. Responsiveness, in my understanding, is therefore not narrow managerial efficiency. It is about creating institutional conditions that protect intellectual work, even within the real constraints identified by the IOP of increasing compliance demands. The task, therefore, is not to add layers, but to make strategic shifts. And again, here I propose 3 shifts: streamlining and integrating the research support ecosystem, strengthening innovation and knowledge translation pathways, and a differentiated quality sensitive research performance framework. So, streamlining and integrating the research support ecosystem. We need a coherent end-to-end research support pathway, from proposal development to post-award management, supported by an integrated digital ecosystem. This includes strengthening pre-award support, improving turnaround times for proposals and ethics processes, refining procurement for research needs, and ensuring efficient, visible post-award administration, including engagements with funders such as the NRF. At the same time, research support units must be repositioned as enabling infrastructure. They must function not only as custodians of compliance, but as partners in the academic project. The measure of success here will be simple: whether systems are experienced as enabling or whether they are experienced as obstructive. The core aim is to reduce the time researchers spend navigating systems and increase the time they spend doing actual research. Sorry. Strengthening innovation and knowledge translation pathways. We need clearer pathways from research discovery to application. This includes supporting proof of concept work, strengthening industry and public partnerships aligned with institutional strengths, and equipping researchers to navigate intellectual property and commercialization processes. Here, the Technology Transfer Office is central. Its role must be strengthened as an integrated interface with the research community, ensuring that where research has application potential, the pathway is supported and enabled towards commercialization. And finally, a differentiated, quality-sensitive framework. The revised promotions framework has thankfully begun to shift from counting outputs to weighing them. This logic must now be extended across institutional systems. Internal reward and recognition systems need not only value DHET accredited publications, but also they can value leadership in scholarly communities, engaged scholarship, innovation, and strong postgraduate supervision. In this way, the system aligns with what we say we value. In summary, then, systems and responsiveness determine whether researchers are enabled or obstructed, and whether the intellectual work we value is in fact possible. And so, in conclusion, let me return briefly to where I began. The question before us was, what does it mean for UWC to be a leading research university? And my argument throughout has been a simple one. A leading research university is not defined by a single metric. It is defined by a set of relationships that must be held together carefully and deliberately. And the person who holds those relationships that make research excellent and significant is the DVC for Research and Innovation. The role of the DVC, therefore, in my view, is not primarily a matter of portfolio management. At its core, the role is threefold. 1, to cultivate the intellectual environment in which rigorous and excellent research can take place. 2, it is to ensure an institutional infrastructure that actively enables rather than constrains that work. And 3, it is to uphold the ethical integrity within which responsible knowledge is produced. In essence, the DVC RNI is responsible for advancing the research mission at UWC. And the IOP reminds us that this mission is grounded in high academic standards, intellectual rigor, and a commitment to the public good. And that is our fundamental responsibility as a leading research institution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof, for the presentation and also for the very skillful way in which you put together the narrative of that journey from where we are to becoming a leading institution. We have an opportunity for about 10 minutes of Q&A, and I'd like to see who wants to ask the first question. Prof, there we go. 2 questions on this side.
David is going to ask me what is epistemology.
That wouldn't be a bad question. No, I just didn't want to hog. That's why I took a while to put my hand up. But so you're currently a Saatchi chair, and we've got this massive influx of Saatchis at the moment that we're rejoicing in. I'm worried that they're not going to be a clear part of the strategy of heading towards being a leading research university. And I think maybe in the past, the Saatchis have felt underutilized. You can speak from your experience in that. How do you think you'll change that, and what leading role can they play in changing the university, not just their own disciplines?
Thank you. Thank you so much, David. Yes, I do think Saatchi chairs have a far greater role to play in the research strategy than we have played in the past. I think the first thing for me is to recognize that Saatchi chairs can't be seen as isolated spaces of prestige and excellence, and then they sit off in their corners and they do their own research and don't contribute to the institution. I think there's so much to leverage in terms of what they can contribute. Firstly, I think that there is, the funding that Saatchi chairs receive is a funding that cannot be considered to be the sole property of that Saatchi chair. It has to be considered as it has to be integrated into the research strategy of the institution. So when a person gets a Saatchi chair, it's not just about their own research program. It's about how do we integrate that. And what I was speaking about in terms of transdisciplinarity, I think is a key factor. I, for example, am already collaborating as a Saatchi chair with Saatchi chairs from other parts of the country. And I think that there's so much possibility for us to come together and leverage the connections between Saatchi chairs in our institution across disciplines rather than concentrating it within particular faculties. So, for example, with running costs or with conference attendance or with, there's so many different possibilities that we can leverage. And I think that the main point is not to treat our Saatchi chairs as isolated pockets of excellence, but to bring that into the university. Oh, and mentorship, of course, that's a big one.
Thank you. There was another question on this.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Nadar, for your presentation. A challenge that UWC has faced in recent years is meeting our postgraduate enrollment targets and then graduating sufficient numbers of masters and PhDs in adequate time. If you were DVC, how would you deal with that challenge?
Thank you. So the postgraduate enrollment is always about numbers, right? And the numbers are important because if we don't meet our numbers, we don't get our subsidy, and it has knock-on effects. And we've experienced this most perceptibly, I think, last year when we had to implement budget-cutting mechanisms because of this. But I think it's important to diagnose. Um, why we don't meet our enrollment targets. What are the issues that surround it? And I mean, there could be a number of reasons. I don't think that there's only one. But when we identify those reasons, then we can begin to act more decisively. So, for example, um, if we locate the problem in recruitment, then we need to act decisively on recruitment and marketing, right? But last year, when I was acting dean in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities, something we discovered is so simple. It was an administrative block. What we found was that students had been given offers, but they didn't come back, right? They didn't respond, or they didn't get the letter, or whatever. And in one particular department, all it took was for them to pick up the phone. The administrator picked up the phone and said, "We've made you an offer, but you didn't respond. Oh, I didn't get the email. Oh, so sometimes it's just as simple as that, as administrative follow-up. But I also think, particularly with postgraduates, we have to be honest about what our juniorization of our faculties have done, right? Because under budget constraints, we are letting senior professors go, and we're replacing them with people at lecturer level. That has a direct impact on supervision capacity. And so people don't want to take in students because they don't have supervision capacity. Or even if we do have supervision capacity, in terms of human resources, we have the warm bodies, those people might not have been capacitated on how to supervise. So they consider supervision to be a huge burden. So we have to create systems where we are developing supervisors, we're developing the ability for people to supervise. Because unlike it's like when you get a PhD, it doesn't automatically translate into you being a good supervisor. The same way, just because you have a PhD doesn't mean you'll be good in front of the classroom. These skills need to be developed. Again, I'm not keen on outsourcing that. I think, and this is to go to David's question, I think that we have the resources within the university, in our senior scholars, in our more established scholars, to be able to offer that supervision training, and we need to leverage that.
Thank you. I think we have maybe time for one more question. And please, if you do have other questions, remember to email them through to the registrar's email address. There'll be an opportunity there to collate the questions. Any final question at the back? There we go.
Good morning, Prophet. Many thanks for. Good morning, Prof, and many thanks for such a wonderful presentation. I think it was quite loaded. I would like to find out from you, because you spoke so highly of research and postgraduate, but I would like to find out from you with regards to the strategies that we might have in increasing the postdoctoral researchers within the university, because I believe their presence also does contribute a lot in ensuring that our research outputs are good, but also to some extent they do help, should I say, lecturers or supervisors in mentoring other students, especially MSc honors and PhDs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So at the moment, of course, we have UWC funded postdoctoral fellows. And then we also have postdoctoral scholars who are funded by other research institutions like the National Research Foundation. Some people, when they apply for big grants, they also get postdoctoral scholars attached to those grants. how to increase that requires us to have the same kind of strategy that we have with our funding framework. We cannot only rely on internal funding or the National Research Foundation. We have to be more creative. I'm thinking here about one of my PhD students who went on to become a Marie Curie postdoctoral scholar at Leeds University. And increasingly, we are being we, especially scholars from the global north or institutions of global north, want to collaborate with us. The question is, how do we engage them in such a way that when we have those partnerships, we're able to say, well, can we also co-supervise, co-mentor postdoctoral fellows across internationally? We also have the real problem that a lot of our postdoctoral fellows can also come from other countries that and in that sense we increase our internationalization goal so we can tick, but at the same time our HR says, well, you can't appoint them because they're not South African. And so we have to constantly navigate these systems, and we have to navigate the tension between how to allow our postdoctoral scholars to contribute to our research strategy while at the same time recognizing that there are a number of systemic issues that might prevent us from appointing more postdocs. So it will require a creative imagination, I think, around that.
Thank you so much, Professor Rajani, for the time taken to put all of this together and the preparation. I think we can see that went into pulling the data as well as the narrative account together. We really appreciate that, and for your making yourself available. Feedback, as per our process, will be through HR, and of course we have an interview opportunity a little bit later on in our program. But for the moment, this concludes the engagement with you in terms of our audience, and we want to wish you well. So thank you. Thank you. See you later. I think this is your code, Prof. Is this your code? Probably the room has warmed up a lot since this morning. Yes. Thank you very much. All right. All right. So, on that note, we have concluded the morning's engagements, and I just want to take some process advice from our registrar's office in terms of way forward from here. Dr. Nita?
Thank you, Rector. Good morning, colleagues. The SACC now may go back to the Rector's boardroom. The interviews will begin in about, what's the time now? About quarter past 12, we need to be in there. So other colleagues, if you have additional questions that need to serve at the interview itself, make sure that you have emailed those to registrar at UWC. I'm on my way now to get the questions and collate those. And for the rest of the UWC community, enjoy your day and back to the office, I think. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rick.